Hornet is one of the best parts of Hollow Knight Silksong, and one of the best things about Hornet is her voice acting by Makoto Koji. Ever since the original Hollow Knight, everyone knew that Hornet's little yells and her random phrases in buggies, whatever language is being spoken by her, were great. Hollow Knight Silksong is really shown to be fantastic in all of its sound design. The voices that it gives to all of its creatures, the music that Hornet can play on her needle-in, and the music that plays for every boss. It's all phenomenal, but one of the things that I always loved in this game is just being able to hit out a Garama. Just like how in Hollow Knight, we spent so many years and so many memes talking about Hornet's Shahs, her Adidos, her Git Gud. There's just something about Makoto Koji's voice acting that sticks with you, you know? It's something that makes Hornet who she is, more than a lot of the other factors Hornet has going for her. With all that being said, Team Cherry decided to add an option to turn off Hornet's voice. I don't really understand the need for it. I think maybe Team Cherry was looking back at the original voice acting of Hornet in the first Hollow Knight and thinking that it would all sound like this. Yeah, I think if Team Cherry kept Hornet this loud and rambunctious in Silksong with everything we have to do with her, then it probably would have been a good idea to maybe tone that down a little bit. But the thing is, they did tone that down a little bit. Hornet is not nearly as loud and maybe annoying to some people as she was in Hollow Knight when you fought her. Now when she attacks, she's a lot more reserved, she's not screaming out full words most of the time. Things like Garama only exist because she's taunting. I don't know if she really speaks much outside of that. And all the other sound effects in this game, none of them really seem much more substantial than Hornet's voice. So it seems odd for there to be a specific option to turn off Hornet's voice in combat when all other sound effects are left untouched. So because of this, I've never actually tried this option. And I wanted to see what would happen if you do turn off Hornet's voice, because I've not met a person who really does that, and Hornet's voice changes when you have different crests on and do things in Silksong. For example, her entire voice acting changes when you bind with the Beast crest. It becomes bestial, it becomes more feral, and it's a really cool detail. A detail that I would be worried anyone would miss. And things like her taunt while she's in the Beast Crest is incredible. But when you give an option to new players to go in and turn off Hornet's voice, you will miss all of those details. I had hoped before making this video that it wouldn't turn off some of the special voices that Hornet does, but it certainly does. Yeah, you no longer hear any of the great voice acting when it comes to Hornet's actions in combat when you turn off her voice in the settings. Now, that being bad enough, I was very, I don't want to say worried, but I was interested in seeing what else changed by turning off Hornet's voice in the options menu, because the option itself is just called Hero Voice, and Hornet's voice is used a lot in this game. She's not a silent protagonist like the Knight was. She is not quote-unquote hollow, even though we know that the Knight really wasn't hollow either. So her actions always have voice to them. Her talking to other people is voice acted. Her walking around the world is voice acted. Her doing things in cutscenes is voice acted. Every silk skill she uses is voice acted. Everything combat related Hornet does is voice acted. So that left me with a lot of places to look if I wanted to see what voices were turned off when you turned off her voice in the settings. Now to begin with, does turning off Hero's voice turn off the voices Hornet has in conversation with other bugs? And fortunately, it does not. So you still get to hear Hornet's voice and Hornet's conversations with other bugs. It just specifically seems to target combat. And by targeting combat, it also targets some non-combat capabilities. In case you didn't know, dear viewers, if you have the throwing ring on in Hollow Knight Silksong and you taunt with it, you get a nice Poshanka, which I think everyone is a huge fan of. And when you go out to see Chakra with the rings, she will respond to your Poshanka, given that she's the one who gifted them to you after doing all of her quests and helping her find her master. It's a great detail. A lot of the voice acting Hornet does is just down to great hidden details, and sadly, a lot of those details will not be available to anyone who turns this option off. Because you're taunting, you do not yell Poshanka anymore. Chakra still responds to you, which is very nice, but it just makes me feel sad inside to not hear Hornet yell Poshanka, to not hear her Garama, as a beast. These are details I want everyone to experience. So, my own soapbox aside, what else does turning off Hornet's voice affect? Does it affect what she does in cutscenes? I know the hero voice option, as written in the menu, only turns off Hornet's voice for exploration and combat, but it also turns off things like taunts, so I wanted to see if it would turn off things like Hornet's screams during in-game cutscenes. And as Graveroot snaps Hornet's neck, she definitely screams, and it's definitely not turned off. So, even though that is technically an exploration moment for Hornet, a very negative exploration moment for Hornet, she is still allowed to scream, so hooray. People who turn on this option are not going to be missing the true sounds of anguish coming out of Hornet's mouth in many times in this game. I feel like Hornet goes through the ringer a lot in Hollow Knight Silksong. And they even get to hear her voice while she is actively escaping the predicament that the Graveroot put her in. So it does appear to leave Hornet's voice on in certain combat and exploration places, while turning them off in others, like just by generically using the taunt and your attack option. What about when you're fighting a boss? Obviously, I don't mean in normal combat, because that's the whole point of the setting. It turns off Hornet's voice in combat. But I mean in specific, unique combat instances. Like at the end of Phantom's boss fight, you beat her by learning how to parry, and while you learn how to parry, Hornet comes up with some special sound effects. By the game's logic, those sound effects should be muted, as that is Hornet's voice during combat. However, you'll find, my dear viewers, that they are not muted at all. Hornet still gets her special little yells out as she is able to learn how to parry and take down Phantom, even though the hero voice option is turned off, as I showed earlier with my very silent taunt and no Garamas. So it appears as if it only seems to affect your standard moveset. When they add new movesets, when they do specific instances of cutscenes and gameplay integration together, those are not made silent. It is very interesting and somewhat arbitrary what is and isn't considered Hornet's voice to be cut down with this option. So, I mean, that's the whole point of this video, right? To find how arbitrary and how specific this option is. So how does it work in actual cutscenes? And before even saying that, here is Hornet yelling out very clearly to Yarnaby to get into her house, while her hero's voice is turned off. It's a very strong and meaningful option there, Team Cherry. Thank you for giving it such a specific name that we all can clearly tell what it does. But yeah, the cutscene that Yarnaby has where she drills into Hornet's shell, her body, whatever she is doing to her. We don't really want to see that. It's very loud on Hornet's end, and very understandably so. And with an option like Hira's voice turned off, you might imagine she doesn't get to yell as loud. You would be wrong. What was I saying before? Hornet gets put through the ringer in this game? Yeah, it is very true. And even when you're looking outside of the Witch Crest quest, it still gets pretty bad for Hornet in a lot of scenarios. But this is one of the worst, and at the very least, if you've turned on the option to get rid of Hornet's voice because you found it annoying, you will still get to hear her excruciating experiences in vivid and loud detail. Great voice acting is all I got to say to that. More proof that gameplay only is silenced when it is not in a cutscene. All taunts will be muted when you turn off Hornet's voice, except for the taunts that start a boss fight, like the ones against Grandmother Silk. And technically, you can also taunt Widow into starting her boss fight. So you will get to hear Garama 2 times in a playthrough when you know how to taunt to start the boss fights. And beyond that, Grandmother Silk also has another great example of a gameplay slash cutscene moment where you can choose to bind and actually get to hear Hornet's voice in that moment, even though the setting is turned off. So at this point, I was kind of just looking through all these gameplay and cutscene hybrids to see if any of them were getting muted. The general idea I found was that pretty much none of them got muted. However, I will show one more that I was interested in. What happens when Hornet starts to struggle at the beginning of Act 3? Initially, I just wanted to check what happens when Hornet starts to feel really terribly. She does so at the beginning of Silksong when she's thrown down a pit, and she does so at the beginning of Act 3. But I also forgot that in both of those cases, she binds in a kind of cutscene as well. So if you have Hornet's voice turned off, you will never hear her binding sounds under normal circumstances. But when you do it in these cutscenes, you hear it anyway. Yes, I have Hornet's voice turned off, and yet she still makes sounds in these cutscene gameplay moments. I keep saying the same thing, but it is interesting to me how consistent it is. There must be some kind of flag Team Cherry put where they know you're not in full gameplay control at those moments. And much the same, although you are in full control here when she is hurt, but you will still get to hear Hornet's voice turn on when this little movable cutscene starts, and then her voice will immediately turn off again the second she starts feeling better. So it is a very strange and arbitrary mix of when Team Cherry decides to mute Hornet with this option on. I feel like the easy thing to do would just to literally not make Hornet make any sounds, but I appreciate that they put more effort in than just doing that, because I feel like if you mute Hornet entirely, you muzzle her up, you're kind of missing out on a lot of what makes Silksong great. So at the very least, I can appreciate that they didn't silence her too heavily. So where does that leave the option to turn off Hornet's voice? I wanted to experience what it was like to beat a boss in this game with no voice turned on. I picked Plasmified Zango because he's like the only boss in this whole game who doesn't have any boss music going on. It's very strange. He's kind of an afterthought in all ways when it comes to being a boss fight. Very sad fate for Zango, but I just wanted to see what it was like with essentially only the sounds of Zango going on. And having done so, and looking back at it now, I just don't like it. Yeah, I don't like Hornet being quiet. It just feels very odd. It's like playing Ocarina of Time without Link screaming his head off every time he rolls. You know, it feels unnatural. There are positive ways to use the option to turn off the hero voice. I think it's cool to hear the sound effects without Hornet's voice. You get to hear, like, how all the sound effects were composed. I didn't know the flint slate sounded like that when you activate it. I didn't really hear the fire effects after your needle swings, and every other effect can be overshadowed by Hornet's yelling at points in time. But I only really say that to come up with a reason to turn off Hornet's voice, because I'm not going to do that. If anything, making this video made me appreciate Hornet's voice acting way more, and it reminded me of some voice clips she gets that are, you know, they're very nice, they're very sweet, they're cute, you know? I like a lot of Hornet's voice acting a lot. I find that she has a lot of range, which is surprising, and when you play this game as long as I have, sometimes you can forget those little details. You hear Hornet yelling so often that you forget to sit down and listen to them. So, I guess that's my advice to all of you watching this video today, is if you want to turn off Hornet's voice, you can of course do so. Maybe you find her annoying. But if you want to experience everything Silksong has to offer, I recommend you leave her voice on and experience the great voice acting that I've come to love.